Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on, and that usually includes talking to really smart people like I'm going to talk to today. As you may know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about medical devices, ponder about nanotech, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. Both of us are lawyers, so we have to say this is not legal advice, not clinical advice. But I do these podcasts because they're a lot of fun and I find myself learning something new each time. So it would be great to know if someone's listening. If you like what you hear, please please comment, please subscribe, and please share. If you want to find me, you can reach me on Darshan Talks on Twitter or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our podcast today is actually really exciting. Our podcast today is going to be about a few different things. We're going to talk about really coming down to the crux, which is ethics and philosophy, and how does all this come together? So we're going to tie that to things like technology, things like bio, so everything from bioethics to sort of life sciences in general. So if you are in the life sciences and you're going, just because we can, should we do so anyways? So today's discussion is going to be really interesting and exciting for that reason. Our guest for today is the CEO and co-founder of Encryption and research associate professor at the University of Buffalo. And before we continue, how can they actually reach you again?
So you can go to my webpage, davidkoepsell.com, and that has a contact form for me, or you can email me through that. That's the best way to do it. You can also follow my Twitter and DM me.
There you go. And in case that wasn't evident, our guest for today is David Koepsell. David, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good to have you on again. I believe it's an exciting time for you because you're now finally in the green. And do you want to explain what that means from a Mexico standpoint?
Yeah. So Mexico has done pretty poorly during the pandemic. We had the fourth highest raw number of deaths, and we're not that big of a country. We're about a little less than half the size of the U.S. So Mexico City, of course, has been sort of the epicenter because there's 8 million people in the city and there's 20 million people in the general metropolitan area. So we were in yellow for most of the pandemic, which meant that there were a fair number of restrictions. We were in red right around the turn of the year, so because of the Christmas holidays and laxity about caring for
red.
Yeah, we went into red for 2 months, and then this 2 weeks ago we went back into green, and that was a big deal because our kids have all been home doing Zoom school for that period of time, and there were severe restrictions on numerous activities. So now we're in green. Well, we actually just went back to yellow after 2 weeks in green, but they're keeping kids in classes with lots of precautions, and that's been a big deal for my wife and I, who are both trying to do our jobs as well as supervising our kids' classes, and it's been helpful, and we've had a productive couple of weeks as a result, and our kids are extremely happy to see their friends in school.
That's so great to hear. Here's a question for you. This is going to sound really obvious for someone who's living in Mexico. What does green, yellow, and red mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the semáforo, the light system, right? So red was obviously where, pretty much they locked us down. Nothing was open. You couldn't, most people were not, if they could help it, were not going anywhere. It was an attempt that other countries have tried to use to, sort of create some sense of civic responsibility and ensure that people were helping to contain the spread of the coronavirus. So, the stoplight system is imperfect, and there's a lot of politics around it as well, because there's a lot of pressure on businesses who have done poorly here as well as in the States. I spend part of my year usually in the States. So it's an interesting socio-technical experiment. But it seems to be possible to bring the levels down using that system, and that's what particularly Mexico City has been able to do. They have very good leadership, I think.
So that's awesome. So what you're telling me is that you're finally sort of getting around the bend, if you will, and people are finally coming out and can do this in a responsible way. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, so I think people have tried to be very responsible here. I spend part of my time in Florida, part of my time in Mexico City, and I was actually in Florida getting vaccinated a couple of months ago. I see a lot more mask usage in Mexico City than I do in Florida. So there are differences, obviously, in the way the societies have addressed this. And that's true, I think, in the States from state to state as well. But there's a lot of pressure from businesses and individuals who have no choice but to work to keep things open as much as possible. Of course, we pay the price for it here, having almost, well, they estimate it's closer to 400,000 than 200,000 deaths in Mexico. So that's based on excess death statistics.
Which it reminds me of what's going on in India. I have family there, and a lot of people assert that you can't trust the numbers the government's putting out because it's just terrible in every scenario. So it sounds like most world governments are trying to underestimate the extent they can because it just looks terribly from a political standpoint.
Yeah, the New York Times ran, and I think actually The Economist ran an excellent piece a couple of months ago on excess death statistics, because we know absolute numbers of people who die every year, and this is something they can't hide because all of that is measurable, but the reasons why they die haven't always been fully explained. So if The Economist looked at excess deaths around the world, and although the world statistics now, if you go to I go to WorldCat and I look at the current statistics, it's about 3 million dead, I think. But Economist said, based on excess deaths worldwide, it's closer to 6 million, and you can go country to country and see where the variation is. So these are interesting forensic accounting techniques that we'll be doing for, I think, the next decade to try to understand what went wrong, because a lot went wrong with how we handled this pandemic.
Which is kind of interesting to me because you start thinking about the pandemic itself, and one of the arguments you keep hearing is, well, we had no flu, or we had people didn't go in for their cancer checkups, and overall people just didn't show up in the hospital as much. That must mean that we have. Yes, we may have paid for it in the cost of the pandemic, but we sort of recovered that cost and everything else. And what you're really saying is, we did that. We have a count of what we would expect and what we have, and you can attribute it in any way you want. But the fact is, these are excess deaths.
That's right, and every year, there are deaths from the flu worldwide too, but they were never. They were well outnumbered by the deaths from COVID by all accounts. So, I mean, in the worst year, there have been flu pandemics where maybe 1 million people died worldwide. But those are the exceptions, and it's like once every couple of decades. So there's just no comparison here. And we have a flu shot, and the flu shot has been effective. It's not always as effective as it might be, but it does work, and it has brought down our deaths every year from flus.
Now the good news is, while this was obviously a terrible period for most of the world, you actually got a chance to work on some of your books. You actually got a chance to take a step back and go, what am I doing? Can I concentrate and focus on it? Could you talk a little bit about the books you're working on and what you're doing and how's that been going?
Sure. So I edit and contribute chapters and to books pretty much all the time. But this year there's been a lot of, I think the publishing world has picked up a lot during the pandemic, because writing is something you can do at home typically. I have a number of chapters and one book I'm editing. So I've been, I'm a philosopher, and I've had a very, sort of varied publishing career, and I've been contributing to these books on philosophy and popular culture for about 20 years. A friend of mine from graduate school, Bill Irwin, who's a distinguished professor at King's College, is the editor-in-chief of a series that, I mean, he really started this trend. I'm very impressed by what happened. It's writing books on philosophy and popular culture. So the idea is you take some bit of popular culture and you can ask philosophers to talk about it. And we do that with, the first one he did was a Seinfeld and philosophy book, and I think that sold 500,000 copies or more, which is amazing for a philosophy book. And then a bunch of other presses and other authors and editors have created similar books. So I edited one with my friend Robert Arp on Breaking Bad and philosophy, which came out I guess around 15 years ago. I don't even know. The time's passed so much. Anyway, so Breaking Bad and philosophy came out. I can tell you in a second. It's right here. Back, it was Open Court, and they used to have the series at first. That was 2012. So that was a fun book to write, and Bad or Living Through Chemistry is the subtitle. I'm doing a chapter now for a book being edited by another fellow from King's College, and it's on Breaking Bad and philosophy. So a general introduction to philosophical issues in Breaking Bad and philosophy.
So let's pick that one first, because let's be honest, that's kind of interesting. As you put it right before we started, you are one of the preeminent researchers and thought leaders around the philosophy of Breaking Bad, which I think is both awesome and hilarious at the same time.
Yeah.
So let's start with the premise. What exactly is the premise of Breaking Bad, and then what kind of issues did you get into?
Oh, that's lovely. So that's the chapter right there. Breaking Bad was, this chronicle of a guy who's a real nebbish, right? Walter White, who, becomes a drug king in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and takes on Mexican mafia and, becomes this legendary figure. And it's a great examination of numerous ethical issues, even bioethical issues, because he was making a pharmaceutical compound, high-grade methamphetamine. It's just a great opportunity to explore numerous concepts about duties, obligations to family, to state and society, the notion of philosophical issues like nihilism, existentialism, and other sorts of things that we could talk about for hours. But anyway, as a result of that book and the second one I edited with on the subject for another press, I've been interviewed by a number of newspapers and TV shows about Breaking Bad and philosophy. But that's something that I think is very important. So when I was an associate professor in Holland, my chairman said, "Well, why are you doing this stuff? May as well not have bothered with that. That's not really, intellectual." And I said to him, "Well, more people have read this than any other philosophy article out of this department." So that's true because most people don't read philosophy. It's just philosophers who read philosophy. So we reach regular people, ordinary people who happen to like a particular show. And the first one was Seinfeld, and now there's every facet of popular culture has been covered in these great books. And they're really, high quality articles from actual philosophers with important things to say. And centering it around discussion of something in popular culture gives something for ordinary people to care about. Otherwise, if I just, try to lecture about ethics to people in general, they're going to tune out probably. But if it's about something they care about, like a TV show. In my son's case these days, I'm doing it about Minecraft. So I'm using Minecraft as a way to explore ethical issues with him and teach him values. So I think this is a really important way for philosophers to contribute to our discussions in society.
So let's ask this question because I'm curious, and you've already sort of seen the show and written literally a book chapter about it. If you're talking about the philosophy of Breaking Bad, the entire series basically starts because Walter White can't afford the cost of treatment
Of healthcare, right?
healthcare.
Exactly.
What philosophical issues do you raise from that? Do we have a duty to enable people to be able to take care of themselves? What comes out of that is obviously what's going on right now politically, where President Biden, and I'm still having a hard time going down the path of, with every new president, I struggle with this, but saying President Biden, but President Biden is coming out and he's trying to struggle with whether we need to have Medicare for all.
Mhm.
And would Walter White have been covered? And ethically, do we as a society owe him that duty?
Right. So one of the memes at the time that I recall was Walter White in Sweden, right? He needs money for he has cancer, he needs treatment. He gets it because, it's provided by his government, and that's the end of the show. It's a very boring version of the show. But it does, that was the whole theme, right? Was what are the duties that he is owed by the state, because he feels like he's been owed something, and he has a sense of being wronged because he's not provided with whatever it is he thinks he was owed. And then as a result of that, he obviously makes some poor decisions, but for maybe the right reasons, because he wanted to take care of his family and he realized he had failed them. So it's so complex, and it's such a wonderfully done piece of fiction. Vince Gilligan, crafted it so thoroughly around ethical issues that it was really a great opportunity for us to explore them in numerous books. So the one I'm editing now is on Mad Max and philosophy. So that's, now there's another Mad Max movie that'll be coming out. So we just put out a call for chapters for that. To get back to the question of other things I'm writing, so yeah, I'm doing some blockchain stuff too. I have a chapter I'm working on for a book that's coming out from Springer, edited by Wendy Charles, on blockchain and medicine. My chapter, of course, is on genomics. Actually, our chapter. So I'm co-authoring it with my spouse and partner and co-founder of Encryption. So that's going to be coming out early in 2022. Other pieces of writing that I'm catching up with now are on ethics and intellectual property and IT technologies, which is a theme I've been working on for decades. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Just nothing crazy. What is it? 4 books?
I'm only doing chapters for 3 of them. So, and another article I'm working on with a friend of mine has to do with personal identity, NFTs, and artificial intelligence. And then I'll leave it on that.
Okay. I'm gonna have to come back to that one in a second, but let's start with the one you mentioned on genomics. You're doing that with your spouse.
Right.
Could you tell a little bit about how it is? So first of all, more importantly, could you tell us about your spouse first, so that people see the context and why that's important?
Yeah, Dr. Gonzalez is a scientist in genomics, specifically pharmacogenomics. And she is who got me interested in genomics in the first place about 15 or 16 years ago when we met. She is doing work at the National Institute of Genomics and Medicine. It's called INMEHEN. And her research has focused on the interaction of various medicines with populations here in Mexico. So this is a really important field. Pharmacogenomics has tremendous application to personalized medicine, because not everybody metabolizes the same drug the same way. And this can lead to real problems, and your dosing, whether you should even give it to people should be first, in many cases, determined by genetic study. So doing a study of that person's genetics, and so she's really the expert in genomics of the two of us. I contribute what I know about bioethics and ethics and law, but I always rely on her to fix my misconceptions about the science and continue to educate me every day.
So she is the true blue scientific expert on pharmacogenomics, and you get to talk about the ethics and the philosophy associated with it. So let's start with the first question associated with it. Like, I actually, as you know, I'm a pharmacist as well, and I'm not quite. I just realized that my title comes up as Kulkarni Law. I need to change that in a second.
Okay.
But I'm a pharmacist as well, and I actually have clients who are working through the Kulkarni Law firm, but I'm helping them with pharmacogenomics. My first question: who owns the data of the research and the testing that's done, as it currently exists?
Good. So that's a thing that perplexes people all the time. Data, it can't be really owned, as you know. It can be owned only in certain forms. So in order to own data, it has to be expressed in a unique expression, right? So this is one of the things that's hung up a lot of people about all sorts of uses of data and the nature of blockchains, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the application of NFTs and things like that to data. But you don't own the data about you. The best we can say is that under certain regimes, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you're also a lawyer. Best we can say about certain regimes is they grant certain privacy rights to some of your data. The best example, but again, the limits of those are significant. So let's take all of the your face. Your face is data points, right? As if you're in the public and you're walking around and I take a picture of you, ordinarily you don't have a right to say, delete that picture. I don't want my data in your hard drive or whatever, or on the web. But there are certain restrictions of how I can use your face, obviously. So I can't commercialize it. I can't put it on a billboard and sell my products with it. But these are, very limited restrictions. I have a free speech right to take pictures and publish them. And you have very limited rights over the use of public data about you. Private data too, again, there's some exceptions. There are state laws and some rules like in the GDPR and other jurisdictions that limit what people can do with personal data about you, but that isn't an ownership right that they're granting. It is a restriction on the use of the data about you that doesn't say that you are the owner, nor does it make you the owner. So these are all, this is a theme that I could talk about for hours, but
we're going to get into it right now because that's so much fun to talk about. So, yeah. But here's the question. It comes down to the concept of ownership in the end, isn't it? In that if you're saying that you can limit the ability of someone else to do something else with the data, isn't that a type or one of the functions of ownership? So I can see a court saying you're allowed the ability to prevent someone else from accessing it. You're allowed to cause someone else to delete it. You're allowed to fix data that's mistaken. You are allowed to the many qualities of data that say GDPR allows for or CCPA allows for. So is it really that far to say that you therefore own the data since you control the data? And therefore, and I know you're going to correct me, so I'm waiting for that in a second. But if you control so much of those functions, is it wrong to say that new functions that you haven't thought of would still belong to you? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is wrong to say that's an ownership right.
Okay. Tell me why.
Well, ontologically and historically, the nature of ownership has to do with rivalrous and exclusive possession of things. So my possession of this little doohickey here is a exclusive to everybody else. Okay,
Mhm.
nobody possesses it at this moment. So as lawyers, we know this possession is 9/10 of the law. Well,
Yeah.
this is founded, and if we look historically at it, the nature of property rights come out of acts of possession and the need for states to create peace around those acts. And you have to, there was a lot of duty for owners to indicate, through indicia of ownership, that they are the proper owners. And eventually we got around to like title, registration and other acts that the state got involved in showing that you are the proper owner. But the thing about things like this and a piece of real estate is that my current possession of it is exclusive to others. I can defend it. I can take acts showing my my possession of it. And the law follows that by recognizing the peaceful possession should be maintained. But in the case of ephemeral things like data or expressions, right? There's no way to be exclusive naturally. So states created intellectual property law like about 300 years ago, very recently compared to other property law, and said, okay, we're going to give limited monopolies for a certain period of time over original expressions of ideas. Um, and but that's it. It's very limited. And copyright and patent started with terms of something like 7 years, and then it kept going, getting bigger and bigger. And a copyright now, because of Walt Disney, is you die, and basically 70 years later, you still own it. Your state owns it. Patents, of course, expire now at 20 years. But there's ways to fiddle around with those edges too. Data, on the other hand, is so important for societies, so important for science, that there's very few ways you can bottle that stuff up. And like your personal genome, for instance, there's that once I get a hold of your genome, there's no way for you to exert any control over it, either legally or practically. And there's a good reason for that, I think, and that is because that, practically, you're sloughing off skin cells all the time, and I can just hoover them up and sequence that, and I get interesting stuff. And we don't want to make scientists afraid to find and use data. And you didn't make that data. It's not your original work of authorship. You didn't. It's not an expression. It's nature's expression, and that's why gene patents were overturned back in 2013, because they're not inventions. Genes are parts of nature, and we should be able to investigate them freely. So yeah, I mean, there are privacy rules, and privacy rules also are historically very recent. In I'm probably going on and on a little more than I should, but
No, you did great.
I think if you look historically at the way that societies were organized in both Europe and at least in Europe and the U.S. In the early days, like 200 years ago, everybody knew what everyone was doing publicly, and sometimes even privately. In fact, in parts of New England, you weren't supposed to have curtains on your house. And this is true in Northern Europe too, because it was an indication you had something to hide. So, this notion of privacy is very recent, and then the idea that states are involved in protecting privacy is extremely recent. The big debate about Roe v. Wade was that the Supreme Court created a privacy right out of the penumbras of these other rights. So yeah, I mean, you want to say that you have ownership over your data or even over the your DNA and things like that, but it's the wrong term, it's the wrong analogy.
I'm going to challenge you.
Okay,
I'm
go
going
ahead.
to challenge you on that because what I'd want, and again, I usually aim for about 15, 20 minutes. We're already at 30, so this will probably be our last volley only because we could just, like you said, talk about this for hours.
Okay.
But here's my question. Why is it not more similar to me having property rights in my cell phone and lending you my cell phone? In the end, I expect you to either give me the cell phone back or destroy it. In no scenario am I going, now that's a phone number for you to use and a cell phone for you to use for the rest of time. Why is this not a similar analogy?
Because as Thomas Jefferson said, if I use my candle to light yours, it deprives my candle or deprives me of nothing. So
But it does deprive me of something.
No. So when I use my candle to light yours, I have spread that fire. It hasn't deprived me of anything. And the fire, you can go light somebody else's candle with it. Ideas and even expressions can multiply perpetually and infinitely without depriving you of anything. Okay? It took this action of a state to say, okay, we're going to give you some limited monopoly for a period of time over an expression to change that. But the fact of nature is that if you learn my genetic code, it hasn't deprived me of anything. And that is the exclusive and rivalrous nature of property that property law protects against, the loss by somebody of something when somebody else has it. So if I hold your cell phone, you don't have it. But if you hold my genome, I still have it.
I really want to get into the Henrietta Lacks case, but let's hold off on that for now. But
Okay.
this was so much fun.
Anytime we should do a Gila episode.
We definitely need to do a Gila episode. How fun would that be? I'm trying to set up something around that, but we'll talk about that for the next time for sure. As you know, we do 4 questions at the end of every talk. Based on what we spoke about, what is a question you'd like to ask the audience?
I want to know what your experience is in participating in public science. So I have a real interest in opening up science, making it participatory for everyone, because I think if you're involved in it, you're going to understand it better. And our product is built around that notion. We think people want to participate in science. We think they want some recompense for it. But I think that this is the great challenge of our age, is to get people excited by, interested in, and participating in public science, which is, after all, what we're counting on to save us from pandemics in the future.
I usually try to answer the question that the guest asks, so I will respond in my way, which is I've actually worked with biohackers before. And,
great.
And that's been very interesting because the biohackers, when you look at the data, suggest that they're almost exclusively masters and PhD level people doing incredible stuff at the fringes of science so that they can break through and sort of find something new and different. Advising them is very interesting because if you do it right, it does not fall under the jurisdiction of the FDA, the NIH, or any of them. Fascinatingly enough, it actually ends up falling under the jurisdiction of I believe it's the FBI, which I think is fascinating. So my experience is advising them and sort of discovering these niches that no one had seen before. Fascinating conversations around that. So that would be my experience. However, I also see the ramifications of that when you start seeing some of the stem cell situations that are happening, especially when you talk about things like in places like Arizona, where there was just an article recently, I want to say it's the Wall Street Journal, but essentially someone coming out and talking about how unproven science was being peddled to patients with the expectation that it's going to help them, when at best it's unproven, at worst it's dangerous. So I love the concept of, as you called it, participatory science. I worry about how quickly it can go in the wrong direction. But yeah.
Fair points. Yeah. So I coached an iGEM team when I
Did
was
you?
at Delft. Yeah, and that was exciting. They were doing work on synthetic biology. One of them now runs a company in the Netherlands on synthetic biology. And I met a lot of SynBio folks, including a woman who does SynBio art, and she was making fabrics out of cells. It was fascinating.
Oh, we just had a comment, by the way, from Dash Canada. I'd love to do more with public science, but often these endeavors need more social media influencers to get the word out. I'm not quite sure I see the point he's making, because why would a social media influencer have an impact on public science? But what's your take on that?
Oh, well, I think it does. I mean, actually, social media is now such a dominant part of our everyday existence that you really need to use it to reach people. We do it with our company to try to get people to be involved in encryption. And yeah, I mean, I notice what happens with my kids. You know, my kids are very much influenced by social media, and so are many adults.
But does it
Involved is really important.
but does it stop you from actually doing what you want to do to yourself, anyways? I guess
No,
it depends on what the word public means.
it can help convince people. So yeah, I think you need to find smart influencers and work with them. I mean, Bill Nye, for instance, is a very important public science media influencer. He doesn't have a TV show anymore, but you know, him and Neil deGrasse Tyson and others have a strong social media presence that does have a positive influence on public perception of science.
Fair point. The two questions we ask: what is something you learned in the last month?
So, what I've learned in this past month, okay. Oh, okay, this is really cool. So I think I mentioned, I think I mentioned in this talk about Minecraft. Um, my kids are really into Minecraft, and I was disdainful of it. I was, you know, like, I don't want to hear about it. You know, that's all they want to talk about. It. They watch all these YouTube videos on Minecraft. But then I realized my son, who's 6 years old, has learned math because of Minecraft. The other day he said to me, 16 times 4 is 64, right? I was like, yeah, how'd you know that? And he said, well, that's the number of slots. You have 64 slots in Minecraft. And he was like, now he's doing all his math because of Minecraft. And he's really learned to read because of it. So I learned with my kids how to set up a private Minecraft server using a Raspberry Pi in our home, and we're running it as a sort of mini society where we have our own little rules and such. So I learned that games and toys and things that children are involved in or interested in can be really positive influences, and maybe as a father, I need to be more attentive to their interests and less dismissive. And I think that was a real breakthrough for me because I'm now developing a closer relationship with my kids through Minecraft.
Second question: what is something you were really excited about and really happy that you participated in within the last 7 days?
Well, Father's Day was this past weekend, and you know, being a father and has been probably the most important thing I've done in my life. Most life-changing thing I've ever done. I did it. Started late. You know, I'm 52 now, and I have a six-year-old and a 10-year-old, and I have to say, getting up and down from the ground to play Legos and such, it would have been a lot easier 10 years ago. But Father's Day is always touching, and it was unlike last year. We were able to go out and have dinner together and enjoy the day, you know, a little more traditionally. So that was just this past weekend.
Very, very cool. As you know, I do a quick recap of our conversation before I ask you the next question, which is, during this conversation, we landed up talking about just your experiences being in Mexico as it goes from yellow to red to yellow to green, and hopefully we'll stay in green. We talked a little bit about how Mexico's dealt with it. You talked about it having the fourth highest raw number of deaths. And then you ended up using that as a jump off point to talk about your experiences and the books you ended up writing. So you talked about the excess death statistics, which I thought was interesting. I've never heard of that as a concept to follow, and that was fascinating to me. You talked about the 4 books. You talked about the one on Breaking Bad and philosophy, blockchain and medicine. You talked about your old book on nanotech, and then the philosophy of IT and IP, if you will, which I thought was fascinating. I really wanted to get into it with lack of access issues. We actually had one of the guests actually asked if we'd end up talking a little bit more about gain of function research, which I'd never heard of until he or she mentioned it, which I thought was really interesting. He or she wanted to ask us whether that gain of function research should be regulated by an international body. So it sounds like a great conversation to have next time, if that's within your scope. We also landed up talking about genomics and how you're working with your spouse to actually write the book on genomics, and how she is, especially pharmacogenomics, and how she is actually a world-renowned leader in the space anyways, and it's just sort of the intersection of both of your knowledge bases that's going to create a really interesting, I can't tell if it's a book or a chapter, but one of those two. Chapter. And we very briefly touched on your book that's going to be on the ethics of self, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I have no idea what that means, but I'm fascinated to learn more about. But I think that covers most of what I can remember. Did I miss anything important?
No, I think that covers it.
Awesome. So David, where can people reach you if they have questions or want to work with Encryption, by the way? And could you tell us what Encryption is?
Yeah, Encryption was started by my spouse and I as a marketplace for de-identified genomic data to encourage people to contribute to science by uploading their data to our site at encryption.com, where they can create a profile and then see if researchers want to buy that data from them, and they keep most of the proceeds from those sales. This is a democratic, decentralized, disintermediated market for genomic data that we think competes with the other monopolized versions of it. When you do direct-to-consumer testing, that's what you're dealing with, is monopoly. You can look for us at encryption.com. But you can also look for me, David Koepsell, just that name there, .com, and find all my contact information there. Reach out to me if you want. I'm always happy to respond. You can also find me on Twitter at drkoepsell.com, and it's David Richard Koepsell, not Dr. Koepsell. It's not that, intimate.
Both of which would be accurate, though. Technically, with our JD, we do get that. We just aren't allowed to call ourselves that. Fair enough. And for those of you who like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you know someone who actually may enjoy this podcast, please share it, because I know I enjoyed doing it. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. David, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Anytime. My pleasure. I really enjoyed it.